The golden immensity of the Sonoran desert stretched beneath a merciless sun, an open-air furnace that seemed to devour its own light, transforming it into shimmering mirages on the distant horizon. It was a brutal beauty, breathtaking and at the same time suffocating, that held ancestral secrets and laws as ancient as its shifting dunes. On this stage of sand and silence, where every grain seemed to whisper millennial tales, Dr. Evelyn Evie Reed's journey and the formidable shadow of Caleb Vance were about to collide explosively. Evie advanced, each step a battle against the soft sand that stole her strength and the wind that lashed her face. Her unruly hair, a tangle of dark, untamed strands, fluttered disheveled, framing a countenance etched by dust and exhaustion. Yet beneath the veneer of sweat and grime, her eyes gleamed with an unshakable resilience, a stubborn fire that refused to be quenched. They reflected not merely hope, but the desperate conviction of a woman who bore the weight of an entire populace upon her shoulders. She knew the peril she courted, the invisible boundary she was poised to breach, but the desperation of her community was a burden heavier than any menace. Canyon's Edge, her home, was dying of thirst. Each day was a countdown to extinction, the palm trees withering, the wells barren, children with cracked lips crying out for a single drop of water. Evie, an archaeologist by passion and an activist by necessity, had dedicated her life to deciphering the whispers of the past, and now those whispers seemed the sole salvation. Armed with ancient maps, time-worn parchments, and a profound knowledge of forgotten dialects, she believed she had unraveled the location of an ancestral water source, long considered a legend, a myth to soothe desperate hearts. The problem, and it was a monumental one, was that this legendary source lay within the most fiercely guarded lands of Caleb Vance, the unquestionable sovereign of the Vance Ranch. Tales of Caleb Vance were recounted in hushed tones, tinged with a mixture of dread and deference. A man whose word was law, whose wrath was legendary, whose prominent scar on the left side of his face served as a constant reminder of a brutal past and an unyielding authority. He was the guardian of traditions, the protector of his people and his lands, and to trespass upon his dominion was an act of audacious defiance few would dare commit. But Evie had no choice. The dread of Caleb was profound, yes, but the fear of witnessing her people perish was infinitely greater. She was the last hope of Canyon's Edge, the only one still possessing the courage and acumen to defy the impossible. Her muscles protested with every movement, searing under the scorching sun, yet she ignored them, propelled by a force emanating from a place deeper than physical exhaustion. The image of her community's parched faces, the vacant eyes of the elders, and the silent weeping of mothers served as a constant whip, driving her onward. She now approached an ancient landmark, a solitary and imposing stone pillar that rose from the sandy ground like a forgotten sentinel. According to the most ancient legends, it was there, at that precise point, that the heart of the sacred lands of the Vance Ranch resided, the threshold between what was permitted and what was profane. The air around the pillar seemed to vibrate with an ancestral energy, a palpable sensation that she was about to shatter a millennial taboo, to desecrate an untouched sanctuary. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to retreat, to abandon this madness. But the resolve in her eyes was stronger than any instinct for self-preservation. If she failed, Canyon's Edge would vanish, swallowed by sand and oblivion. There was no other option, no other path. The future of her people hinged upon this act of defiance, this intrusion that challenged not only the laws of a man, but the tenets of an entire culture. The tension was nearly unbearable, a tight knot in her stomach as she extended her trembling hand to touch the cold, time-worn stone. It was a symbolic act, a silent oath that she would not recede. The sun began to dip on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, yet the ephemeral beauty did not diminish the gravity of the moment. She had crossed the line, she had defied Caleb Vance on his own territory. The question was no longer if she would be discovered, but when and what would be the cost of her audacity. What awaited her beyond that sacred boundary? A swift demise, a humiliating incarceration, or something even more dire at the hands of the formidable Caleb Vance? The answer was not long in manifesting. Like a mirage solidifying, A formidable shadow began to emerge on the distant horizon, growing swiftly as it drew nearer. The muffled sound of hooves pounding on the dry sand reached her ears, a sinister omen that made her heart pound within her chest. A solitary rider, majestic and menacing, advanced towards her, mounted on a steed as black as night. Evie was not alone in her act of transgression. The desert, in its silent immensity, had betrayed her presence. The rider's silhouette, once a mere distant point, now gained sharp contours against the searing orange of the Arizona sky. Each thunderous step of the magnificent black Mustang raised golden dust clouds, forging a nearly mythical aura around the approaching figure. Evie felt a shiver of premonition trace her spine, a profound certainty that the desert had delivered not merely a figure, but a destiny. Her fingers, which moments before had traced the ancient markings on the Sentinel Mesa, froze. The symbols, which promised the key to Canyon's edge's dwindling water, now seemed to writhe in her vision, eclipsed by the imminent presence. The rider halted mere feet from her, and the muffled thud of the animal's hooves on the parched earth was the only sound that dared shatter the heavy silence. There was no doubt. This was Caleb Vance. His figure, imposing and majestic, seemed hewn from the desert's very bedrock, a sovereign patriarch who exuded authority with every fiber of his being. The sinking sun framed his profile, highlighting the prominent scar on the left side of his face, a brutal mark that, rather than disfiguring, only added a layer of dangerous experience to his rugged allure. His eyes, dark and piercing, fixated on Evie, evaluating her with an intensity that stole her breath. It was a clash of titans, though one was a woman of apparent fragility. Evie, with her untamed hair and eyes that mirrored unyielding resilience, did not avert her gaze. She felt fear grip her chest, but her wounded pride and the weight of her community's survival were stronger. This man represented everything she feared: absolute power, the ancient traditions that crushed individuality, and the existential threat to her people. Caleb Vance's voice resonated in the desert's silence, grave and imperious, like the very wind that sculpted the desert's vastness. "Who are you, and what trespass brings you onto my lands, woman?" The question was no request, but a demand, an unwavering command that brooked no hesitation. Evie felt a heat rise through her veins, a volatile mix of indignation and an uncontainable defiance. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. I seek water. My people, Canyon's Edge, are dying of thirst." She did not reveal the exact location she sought, the secret source those markings promised to unveil, maintaining a final line of defense. Her gaze remained firm on his, an insolence that Caleb, accustomed to unwavering submission and unquestioning deference, clearly did not anticipate. She would not bend, not here, not anywhere. A furrow deepened on Caleb Vance's brow. His eyes, previously assessing, now blazed with incandescent fury. "You have trespassed onto Vance Ranch, Dr. Reed. Protected, sacred lands. This is a grave affront to the laws of this desert, an act of war against my family and my people." Each word was a precise, arid blow. The desert's ancient tenets were stark and brutal. The invasion of protected lands by strangers was a grievous offense, its retribution often fatal. Evie felt the crushing weight of ages, the unyielding rigidity of a code that held no quarter for trespassers. Caleb dismounted from his Mustang with surprising agility, the sheer height of his frame further amplifying his intimidating aura. He approached, and Evie could detect the scent of dust and leather that emanated from him, a fragrance both primal and menacing. The stark disparity in their sizes was undeniable, but she refused to take a single step backward. "You will not merely be expelled," he continued, his voice now a lower rumble yet still laden with unyielding authority. "Your intentions, though claimed as noble, represent a profound threat to the security of Vance Ranch. You have witnessed what should remain unseen, and now possess knowledge that must never leave these lands." Caleb's eyes swept over her, not with desire, but with the cold, calculating assessment of a seasoned strategist. A shiver coursed through Evie. "By the ancient laws of my people," he declared, and the solemnity of his words made Evie's heart pound. "And as the patriarch of the Vance legacy, I declare you, under the Vance Code. The declaration reverberated in Evie's mind, a stark, brutal resonance that seemed to rend the very fabric of the air, under the Vance Code. It was not merely possession, it was an annulment, a pronouncement that reduced her to something without will, without voice, without a future of her own. She, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a modern, free activist woman, treated as an object, a pawn in a tribal power play. The shock hit her like an icy wave, paralyzing her. This decision, though appalling, was presented not as a criminal act but as a patriarch's prerogative, a way to assimilate the transgressor, avert future threats, and ensure the secrets of Vancelands remained inviolable. It was a cultural and political imposition, a stark checkmate on her freedom and her very identity. What did it mean to be under the code in the hands of this man? How could she, an independent, fearless woman, respond to being treated as property in a world so vastly different from her own? Uncertainty hung heavy in the air, as dense as the desert dust, promising a confrontation that would transcend the very sands of the Sonora. However, fate had already charted the next steps, and Evie was led into a world that defied all her comprehension. Amidst the golden dust raised by the horses, the Vance mansion emerged like a mirage, but its opulence was real, shocking her with an intensity that stole her breath. It was a sprawling domain of sun-drenched stucco and wrought iron, where ancestral wealth displayed itself without shame, a stark contrast to the arduous simplicity of Canyon's Edge, where every drop of water was a victory and every grain of sand a threat. Evie, an environmental archaeologist accustomed to bare earth and Spartan functionality, felt like a fish out of water, or rather, a desert bloom forcibly transplanted into a forbidden garden. Her rebellious eyes, accustomed to scrutinizing ancient maps and fighting for every scrap of existence, now found themselves lost in intricate mosaics and tapestries that seemed to whisper tales of 1,001 nights. She was a prisoner, yes, and the awareness of it weighed like an anchor in her chest. But the way she was treated was different. No shackles, no explicit violence, just a constant, silent surveillance that followed her like a shadow, every movement noted by trained eyes. She was led to chambers that would make anyone feel like royalty, a vast room where silks and brocades draped every surface, where the scent of jasmine and amber hung heavy in the air. Servants, with expressive faces and curious yet respectful gazes, awaited her. They bathed her in perfumed waters, exfoliated her skin with essential oils, and dressed her in garments that, though modest with their long sleeves and discreet necklines, accentuated her curves in a way that made her blush. Evie felt like an object, a piece in a game she barely understood, but with each soft touch, each rebellious strand of hair patiently tamed, rage and fear mingled with a strange, almost shameful curiosity. Caleb. His name echoed in her mind, accompanied by the image of that prominent scar, of eyes that seemed to read her soul, and of the voice that had delivered the sentence, "Tonight you will be mine until dawn." What audacity! Yet deep down, a part of her, a part she refused to acknowledge, could not ignore the intensity, the raw power, and the unquestionable authority he exuded. He was a man who did not ask, but demanded, and Evie Reed, who had never bowed to anyone, felt a shiver trace down her spine, a mingling of revulsion and dangerous attraction. The hours dragged, each minute a century of anticipation. The sun had already plunged below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, when the chamber door opened. There was no warning, no preamble. Caleb Vance entered the room, his imposing figure filling the space like a force of nature. He was dressed in traditional, finely tailored Western attire, but the understated elegance of the clothes did not diminish his aura of power. On the contrary, it accentuated it. His dark eyes, deep as the desert at night, met hers, and Evie felt the air thin. The tension was almost palpable, so dense it could be cut with a knife. He stopped a few paces from her, his lips curving into a subtle, almost predatory smile. "Evie Reed." His voice was a hoarse whisper, yet laden with authority. "It seems my servants have done well. You are stunning." The compliment coming from him sounded like a provocation, a chilling reminder of her status as a prisoner and the grim purpose of that night. Evie lifted her chin, defiant. "No matter what you dress me in, Caleb, I remain who I am, and I am not your property." Ah, she was stubborn, an untamed beast, and Caleb felt a dangerous heat spread through his veins. It was precisely this that drew him, this flame that refused to be extinguished. He took another step, closing the distance between them. The scent of his cologne, a woody and spiced blend, invaded Evie's senses, unsettling her. "You still haven't understood the laws of the desert, little rebel," he said, his voice graver now. "You trespassed on my lands, threatened my people. And under our traditions you are spoils. Tonight I will claim you, not just your body but your spirit. I will tame this insolence. I will make you understand the power of the Vance Ranch and my own." The threat was clear, but there was something more in his eyes, an intensity that went beyond mere authority, a raw, undeniable desire that mirrored what she, to her shame, felt stirring within her. Evie tried to retreat, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground. "You can try, Caleb," she spat, wounded pride speaking louder than fear. "But my spirit will never be tamed by a tyrant like you." She tried to push him away as he drew even closer, but her strength was useless against his. He held her wrists, his fingers firm, yet not bruising. Their gazes locked, a silent battle of wills, where each second stretched into an eternity. The proximity was electrifying, and Evie could feel the heat of his body radiating into hers, an electric current that made her tremble. "You can fight with words and with your hands, Evie Reed," he whispered, his mouth dangerously close to hers. "But your body already betrays you." And it was true. No matter how loudly her mind screamed to resist, her body reacted to him in a way that terrified and fascinated her. Her skin tingled, her heart hammered erratically, and a wave of heat spread through her veins. He pulled her to him, and the contact of their bodies was like wildfire. It was not an act of violence, no, it was a clash of souls, an irresistible force that dragged her into an abyss of sensations. Evie's resistance, once so fierce, began to dissolve like sand in the wind. Her protests transmuted into gasps, her pushes into touches. His lips found hers with an urgency that stole her breath, an overwhelming kiss that extinguished any last vestige of rationality. It was wild, desperate, and incredibly consuming. She surrendered, yielding to the overwhelming passion Caleb ignited within her, a passion she had never known existed. Her body, indeed, betrayed her mind, succumbing to a physical and emotional connection she had not anticipated, one that caught her by surprise like a desert storm. The gilded light of dawn filtered through the ornate windows of the Vance mansion, painting the chamber with warm hues that starkly contrasted with the icy dread constricting Evie Reed's chest. Beside her, Caleb Vance lay in repose, his formidable face etched with the prominent scar, yet momentarily softened by the embrace of sleep. The oppressive weight of the previous night still permeated the air, thick and palpable, like the fine dust settling after a tempestuous desert squall. Evie felt utterly disoriented. Her mind, a maelstrom of disquieting thoughts and visceral sensations, wrestled to process the raw intensity of what had transpired. She, the rebellious environmental archaeologist and impassioned activist, had surrendered to a man who had claimed her under his ancestral code, and the searing contradiction between her initial fierce resistance and the profound capitulation of her body and emotions teetered her precariously on the brink of mental collapse. She had braced herself to awaken to a blaze of fury, perhaps a cutting disdain in Caleb's dark gaze, but instead she found him stirring, his somber eyes fixed upon her with a disconcerting blend of contemplation and an unexpected tenderness that disarmed her entirely. Caleb, in turn, was palpably affected. The ranch patriarch, who had always commanded absolute dominion over his emotions and his calculated actions, now found himself confronted by a woman who had irrevocably shaken his most entrenched certainties. The searing memory of the fire that had consumed them the previous night blazed in his consciousness, an infernal heat he had never conceived possible, least of all with an outsider who had dared to trespass upon his protected lands. His immutable duty to safeguard his lineage and the unwavering stability of his ranch domain, the very cornerstones of his existence, collided violently with the formidable attraction he harbored for Evie, a potent force that threatened to dismantle every edifice of his known world. He rose to a sitting position, the silk sheet cascading from his powerful frame to his waist, revealing the sculpted musculature of his body and the prominent scar upon his face, which seemed starker, more pronounced, beneath the nascent morning light. The silence in the opulent chamber was almost deafening, broken only by the soft, ragged cadence of both their breaths. Evie instinctively recoiled slightly, drawing the silken sheet higher, feeling utterly exposed and acutely vulnerable as never before. Her eyes, which typically mirrored an indomitable resilience, now bore a profound shadow of confusion and a prickle of nascent fear. She held no premonition of what awaited her, and this gnawing uncertainty proved more profoundly unsettling than any overt, direct threat. Caleb, discerning her palpable tension, moved with a calculated slowness, turning fully to confront her. His voice, when it at last fractured the oppressive silence, was grave and deeply ponderous, devoid of the peremptory command she had instinctively braced for. "Evie," he began, and the sound of her name, pronounced by his lips, sent an involuntary shiver coursing down her spine. What transpired between us cannot be simply ignored. She gazed at him, bereft of speech. Words seemed ensnared in her throat, a tight, intractable knot of conflicting emotions. What did he expect from her? An apology, a vow of absolute submission? None of it felt right, not for her fiercely independent spirit, nor for the bizarre, potent connection that inexplicably bound them. Caleb continued, his expression resolute yet lacking his customary coldness. "My honor, and yours, demand a resolution. The laws of the ranch are unequivocally clear. A woman who is claimed, who shares the bed of her patriarch, cannot simply be cast aside as if nothing momentous had occurred." A chilling shudder ran through Evie. Dismissed? The very notion of being treated as a mere object, a discarded possession, ignited a furious indignation within her. Yet the paramount concern for honor, a concept so profoundly central to Caleb's world, struck her with undeniable force. She knew the traditions were unyielding, but she had never conceived they could lead her to such an impossible, harrowing crossroads. It was at this precise juncture that Caleb, ever pragmatic and propelled by the unyielding gravitas of his leadership obligations, articulated a proposition that struck her with the force of a desert lightning bolt from a cerulean sky. "I propose a marriage, Evie, a marriage of convenience." The word marriage reverberated in Evie's reeling mind, an alien, utterly surreal pronouncement. She blinked, striving to absorb the unbelievable utterance. Marriage with him. The formidable man who had drawn her into his opulent mansion, who had dominated her with an overwhelming force and a passion that had left her breathless. Was this some cruel jest? "A marriage of convenience?" She finally managed to stammer, her voice raw and laced with disbelief. "What precisely do you mean by that?" Caleb regarded her, his eyes keenly penetrating. "It signifies that we shall unite our families, our distinct lineages. This will irrevocably secure your honor and solidify the legitimacy of my position. It is a strategic political solution, a means to integrate you into my family and my people, ensuring order and preempting any future conflicts that might inevitably arise from this unexpected situation. It would be a formal covenant." He paused, and a calculative glint flickered in his dark eyes. "And in exchange, I pledge to actively consider the dire plight of your community, Canyon's Edge. I vow that I will seek a definitive solution for the crippling scarcity of water and resources that afflicts your people." The profound offer struck Evie full force. Canyon's Edge. Her eyes widened, dilating with a desperate recognition. It was the singular chance she had so ardently sought, the only tangible hope for her community teetering on the precipice of extinction. But the exorbitant price. The price was herself. She would be irrevocably imprisoned within a destiny she had never once fathomed, a wife of convenience for a powerful ranch patriarch who had claimed her as his own. The proposition, while extending a lifeline to her beleaguered people, would simultaneously ensnare her within a gilded cage. She stared at Caleb, at the formidable scar on his resolute face, at the unquestionable authority that emanated from his very being, and at the unexpected tenderness she could still glimpse within the depths of his eyes. Her heart hammered erratically within her ribs, a tumultuous fusion of fierce defiance and a desperate burgeoning hope. Sarah's rebellious soul, which had always vehemently refused to be bought or subjugated, now found itself at the most momentous crossroads of her existence. Would she accept this gilded imprisonment in the name of her people, or would her indomitable essence refuse to be bargained for, no matter the cost? The weight of Canyon's Edge lay upon Evie Reed's shoulders, a burden heavier than the jewels now adorning the women of the Vance mansion. She breathed deeply, the air dense with incense and perfume, and accepted. It was not a surrender, but a tactic, a risky exchange. The condition was clear, stated with the firmness she had learned in Canyon's Edge, in days of drought and despair. Caleb Vance must investigate her people's situation, and more importantly, provide the promised aid. The survival of her people depended on this gamble. The following days were a whirlwind of contrasts. Evie was the future Mistress Vance, treated with almost reverential respect, but with every glance from the maids, every bow from the guards, she felt more a prisoner in a golden cage. The Vance mansion was a labyrinth of luxury, with its intricate mosaics, bubbling fountains, and exotic gardens, but for Evie, each corridor seemed to lead to even greater isolation. She found herself enveloped in fine silks, with heavy jewels adorning her neck, but her heart beat with the urgency of her dry community. Adaptation was a daily challenge, a silent battle against a world of rituals and protocols that seemed plucked from a dusty tome. The estate's matriarchs, with their polished smiles and curious gazes, expected her to behave as a decorative figure, a luxury doll to be displayed. But Evie had her foot in the door, her untamed spirit refusing to be framed. She questioned, investigated, tried to understand the complex desert traditions, not out of mere curiosity, but to find loopholes, ways to act. Why this ceremony? What is the purpose of this custom? She asked, to the discomfort of the matriarchs, who expected only a graceful nod. Her rebellion manifested in small transgressions. She preferred simpler cotton clothes that allowed her to move with freedom, instead of the heavy brocades. In the rare meetings where her presence was permitted, and where her silence was expected, Evie expressed frank opinions, at times clashing with the most conservative ideas. "It's not right just because it's always been that way, is it?" she dared to say, making murmurs spread like wildfire through the mansion. Her temperament, forged in the fight for her community, did not easily bend to the court's etiquette. Caleb observed her closely, a mixture of exasperation and fascination in his eyes. He saw the stubbornness, yes, but also the sharp intelligence, the genuine compassion for the less fortunate, and a resilience that reminded him of himself. A mutual, albeit silent respect began to blossom between them, like a rare flower in the desert. However, communication between the two remained formal, distant, marked by the marriage of convenience and the absence of any declaration of feelings that could break the barrier imposed by duty. It was a chess game where every move was calculated and the heart a hidden piece. Evie, however, did not give up on her people. She tried, in every way, to send secret messages to Canyon's Edge, small notes disguised in fruit baskets, or delivered to merchants who occasionally visited the mansion, but all her attempts were in vain. The messages never arrived. Worse, she began to suspect that her communications were being intercepted. The sensation of being under constant surveillance suffocated her, and distrust towards her new allies grew each day. It was as if she were trapped in a bell jar, unable to reach those who needed her most. This isolation was the first significant obstacle Evie faced. How could she help her people if she was completely cut off from them, a prisoner of luxury with her hands tied? For Caleb, the challenge was Evie's stubbornness and her reluctance to conform. Murmurs among the advisers, especially Eleanor Vance, the aunt and eldest adviser, were constant. "She is not like the others, Caleb," Eleanor warned, with a look of concern and disapproval. "Her rebellion can destabilize the lineage." Matriarch Eleanor, guardian of traditions, saw in Evie a threat to the delicate balance of the estate. The tension between the life Evie was forced to live and her ardent desire for freedom and connection to her roots grew with each sunrise. Until when could she maintain this facade of acceptance, this dance that kept her standing, without her rebellious spirit exploding and putting everything at risk? The veneer of composure Evie had maintained, that deft maneuvering that kept her upright amidst the entrenched traditions and relentless surveillance, began to fracture under the weight of insidious and persistent sensations. Initially, they were merely ephemeral bouts of nausea, easily dismissed as the natural disorientation of her confined existence and the arduous adaptation to an environment so jarringly different from her own. It's the sheer stress, the rich, unyielding food of the mansion, the stifling lack of the desert's raw, fresh air from Canyon's edge, she murmured to herself, desperately attempting to ignore the pervasive vertigo that assaulted her upon rising from her opulent bed, or the profound fatigue that seemed to seep into her very bones, rendering even the most uncomplicated tasks an insurmountable burden. She, who had always been a veritable whirlwind of restless energy, now felt like a smouldering ember, her rebellious spirit perilously dim, its once vibrant flame flickering on the precipice of extinction. Weeks unspooled with agonizing slowness, transmuting her vague suspicions into an uncomfortable, undeniable certainty. The scent of certain pungent spices permeating the Vance mansion kitchen, once exotic and faintly pleasant, now triggered an immediate, visceral revulsion. The exhaustion was no longer an occasional inconvenience, but a relentless, oppressive constant, compelling her to seek the most secluded, seldom-used corners of the sprawling mansion for a fleeting respite, far from the piercing, judgmental gazes of the household staff. Her breasts, once firm and unblemished, had grown acutely tender, and a subtle protuberance, still discreet, yet distinctly perceptible to one who knew her own body with intimate familiarity, began to define her abdomen. It was no longer the stress, it was not the food. It was something far deeper, an instinctual, visceral truth screaming a name she desperately refused to utter. One languid afternoon, as she struggled to mask a sudden, violent wave of nausea, a young staff member, Lena Flores, approached with an almost imperceptible discretion. Lena, with her perceptive gaze and a spirit more untamed than most within the Vance household, had observed the insidious shifts in Evie. She was not one of the stoic older ranch hands, rigid in their adherence to ancestral codes, but a young woman who yearned for horizons beyond the Vance ranch's formidable walls, perhaps captivated by the clandestine broadcasts of far-off stories on a hidden radio, tales of other lives. "You're not well, are you, ma'am?" Lena inquired in a barely audible whisper, her genuine concern piercing Evie's carefully constructed defenses. The archaeologist, utterly weary of her ceaseless pretense, merely shook her head, a chokehold of dread constricting her throat. I don't know what is happening to me, Lena, but I cannot under any circumstances arouse suspicion." Lena, imbued with the quiet sagacity that only attentive observation can bestow, offered a suggestion. "My grandmother resides beyond these walls in Cottonwood Creek. She possesses an ancient gift, you understand? She is a healer. No one on the ranch needs to be apprised of this. I can contrive a way for you to go there, suitably disguised after the sun descends and the ranch's vigilance lessens. She is as discreet as a desert whisper." The proposition was audacious, a direct affront to the draconian rules that governed her every waking moment in the mansion, yet the burgeoning urgency of her situation eclipsed all apprehension. Evie nodded, a complex confluence of fear and profound relief washing over her. She desperately required answers, and she required them swiftly before the truth could violently unmask itself, uncontrollably. Under the deepening cloak of night, and with Lena's ingenious assistance, who deftly fabricated a pretext for an urgent visit to ailing kin, Evie managed to discreetly slip away from the Vance mansion. Enveloped in a modest veil that obscured the majority of her face, she followed the young woman through the labyrinthine darkened alleys, feeling the cool, night desert wind caress her skin, an ephemeral liberty that brutally contrasted with the tumult in her soul. The healer's adobe home was austere, exuding a faint, earthy aroma of dried herbs. The matriarch, her face etched with the saga of countless seasons, her eyes piercing and knowing, received them with a profound, comprehending silence. Evie settled onto a soft rug, her heart thrumming an erratic rhythm, as the healer without haste observed her. The elder's voice was soft, yet imbued with an unmistakable authority. "Tell me what afflicts your body and your soul, my daughter." Evie, her voice trembling, recounted the litany of symptoms: the debilitating fatigue, the insidious nausea, the newfound sensitivity in her breasts. The healer listened with unwavering attention, her gaze fixed intently on Evie's abdomen, as if her profound perception could penetrate through layers of fabric and flesh. After a brief yet thorough examination, a gentle palpation of the wrist, a discerning glance at the eyelids, an attentive listening to the rhythmic beat of her heart, the elder leaned back, a discreet, knowing smile gracing her wrinkled lips. "My daughter," the healer began, her voice imbued with a serenity that starkly contrasted with the tempest raging within Evie's breast. "The very breath of the desert has carried a burgeoning life within you. You are pregnant." Those words struck Evie like a bolt of white lightning, more potent, more devastating than any cyclonic dust storm she had ever faced. Pregnant, terrifying, overwhelming, and, in a strange, inexplicable way, profoundly transformative. The world seemed to tilt violently on its axis, and the air grew impossibly thin around her. The night of possession, that searing memory she had desperately tried to relegate to a dark, dust-choked corner of her mind, was now no longer merely a humiliating recollection, but a physical, undeniable reality, a nascent life pulsing within her, irrevocably linking her to Caleb in a manner a mere marriage of convenience could never hope to forge. The shock was immense, a bewildering maelstrom of dread and a nascent, utterly unknown emotion beginning to unfurl within her. The pregnancy changed everything. Her defiant rebellion, her impassioned fight for cherished independence, her fierce reluctance to accept her fated role as Caleb Vance's wife, all gained a new, startling dimension, a raw, undeniable purpose. She was no longer just Dr. Evelyn Reed, the environmental archaeologist and fervent activist battling for her freedom and the survival of Canyon's Edge. She was a potential mother, with an innocent life hanging precariously in the balance, a small precious flame she was now bound to protect at all costs. The pervasive fear of uncertainty, of Caleb's inevitable reaction, of matriarch Eleanor's formidable wrath, of Silas Thorne's predatory machinations, mingled inextricably with a surging tide of fierce protective instinct, potent and unyielding as a mighty desert river in flood. The marriage of convenience, once a cold, calculated political charade, now assumed a real, undeniable purpose, yet also bore a far greater, more profound emotional weight. It was no longer simply about honor, about strategic alliances, but about a child, an heir for Caleb, a future for the minuscule life burgeoning within her. Evie felt a new strength, a fierce, unwavering determination she had never before encountered. She would fight. She would fight for her child, for her family, for a future that she, and not archaic traditions or political maneuvering, would defiantly sculpt. Back at the mansion, the revelation burned in her throat, a volatile secret. She needed to inform Caleb, but how? How would a man steeped in duty and unyielding tradition react to the unexpected, premature arrival of an heir, conceived under such peculiar circumstances? The night stretched interminably, with Evie tossing and turning in her silken sheets, her hand instinctively cupping her still flat abdomen, feeling a burgeoning connection that transcended any pain or fear. At the advent of dawn, with the first tentative rays of the sun painting the vast desert in breathtaking hues of burnished gold and delicate rose, Evie made her resolute decision. She would not procrastinate. She would confront Caleb and declare the unvarnished truth, her head held high in defiant grace. She found him in his expansive office, deeply engrossed in a formidable array of documents and maps, his scar, a stark testament to the desert's unforgiving embrace, standing out with sharper relief under the nascent morning light. He lifted his gaze, a fleeting expression of surprise crossing his rugged features. "Evie? Is something amiss?" Caleb inquired, his voice retaining its habitual commanding authority, yet laced with a subtle, unexpected trace of concern. Evie drew a deep, shuddering breath, the words momentarily caught in a chokehold of dread. "Yes, Caleb, something has transpired. and it will irrevocably alter everything. She strode purposefully towards his imposing desk, her eyes fixed unwavering on his. I am pregnant." The ensuing silence was oppressive, dense as the desert sand before a cyclonic tempest. Caleb remained utterly motionless, the expression on his face an unreadable mask. His dark, piercing eyes, moments before meticulously focused on the reams of paperwork, now bored into hers, searching for the deepest truth. For an agonizingly long moment, he uttered not a single word, meticulously processing the seismic information that threatened to shatter the very foundations of his meticulously planned world. The heir. So incredibly soon, so utterly unexpected. Slowly Caleb rose, his formidable presence circumventing the massive desk. His hand extended not to touch her, but to brace himself on the polished, ancient wood, as if he required a solid anchor in a world suddenly adrift. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice raspy, almost a disbelieving whisper. There was no discernible anger, but a profound, almost staggering astonishment. How is this truly possible? "Nature, Caleb, does not care for our meticulously crafted plans or our convenient arrangements," Evie replied, her voice gaining an unexpected, fierce firmness. "It happened, and now we have a child, an heir." The very utterance of heir seemed to awaken a primal force within Caleb. His gaze became dramatically more intense, a complex, volatile admixture of duty, profound surprise, and an emotion Evie could not for the life of her decipher. Caleb Vance, the man defined by rigid traditions and unshakable duty, was visibly, undeniably in shock. He, who had painstakingly orchestrated a marriage of convenience to forge powerful alliances and secure a prosperous future for his people and lands, now faced a reality that wildly surpassed all his carefully managed expectations. A child, his child. "This changes everything," Caleb declared again, this time with greater force, his voice reclaiming its commanding tone, yet imbued with a new, profound layer of gravitas. "Our union will no longer be merely a matter of cold politics. It will be the unshakable foundation for a family, for the enduring future of the Vance domain." He drew closer, and this time his hands gently, tentatively cupped Evie's shoulders. "Are you absolutely certain?" Evie nodded, feeling a solitary tear trace a path down her cheek, a tear born of fear, relief, and an unbidden hope. "I am certain, and I will do whatever it takes to fiercely protect our child." The news ripped through the Vance mansion like a sudden scorching desert wind, swift and utterly relentless. Matriarch Eleanor, Caleb's formidable aunt and revered counsel, was initially profoundly shocked and openly indignant at the brazen breach of formalities and the unexpected, undignified haste. An heir before the sacred marriage is even properly celebrated. "This is an intolerable affront to our ancestral traditions," she thundered, her voice echoing through the opulent halls, yet the undeniable joy for the continuation of the revered Vance lineage shimmered, impossibly, in her ancient eyes. The sudden prospect of a new heir softened her usual unyielding rigidity, although she vehemently insisted that the marriage ceremony should be immediately brought forward and celebrated with every conceivable pomp and grandeur to legitimize the union and, more importantly, the child. Caleb, propelled by a sudden, potent sense of purpose and an unexpected surge of profound, burgeoning affection for Evie and the child to come, did not hesitate for a moment. He knew with chilling certainty that Silas Thorne, the ruthless head of Thorne Corporation Holdings, would ruthlessly exploit any perceived weakness or irregularity to destabilize the Vance ranch. The pregnancy, though a profound shock, was simultaneously a monumental blessing and an invaluable weapon. He swiftly convened a solemn council of elders, publicly declaring Evie's pregnancy and his unwavering intention to marry her immediately, not merely out of unyielding duty, but out of a profound love that now truly began to blossom, vibrant and unexpected, within his hardened heart. The wedding ceremony was grand, despite its undeniable haste, a breathtaking spectacle of vibrant colors and ancient traditions that inextricably united their two disparate worlds. Evie, resplendent in silk and ancestral jewels, her belly already delicately rounded, felt a strange, profound peace settle within her. She was no longer a mere captive but a formidable partner, a future mother, and irrevocably Caleb's wife. That man, once her formidable adversary, was now her fiercely protective guardian and the father of her child. The ensuing months were a period of intense, profound transformation. Caleb, with Evie's unwavering support, for she now wielded a stronger, more influential voice within the mansion, began to swiftly implement critical projects for Canyon's Edge, meticulously ensuring a secure supply of water and essential resources, thereby honoring the solemn promise he had once made. Evie's community would not only survive, but would flourish, resilient and revitalized, under the formidable protection of the Vance domain. Silas Thorne, realizing the unshakable union of Caleb and Evie and the imminent, undeniable arrival of a new heir, abruptly abandoned his direct predatory intrigues, understanding that any further attack would be perceived as an unforgivable affront to the new, burgeoning, ruling family. The stability of the Vance lands was, against all odds, irrevocably secured. Evie and Caleb, whose arduous story had commenced in a violent clash of indomitable wills and a night of brutally imposed possession, ultimately discovered that love, in its most potent and unexpected form, can be forged in the most unlikely of crucibles, defying ancient traditions and immutable destiny itself. The initial tumultuous passion gradually transformed into a deep, abiding affection, mutual hard-won respect and an unshakable partnership. They learned to deftly navigate the intricate complexities of their vastly different worlds, painstakingly building a strong, formidable family, founded not merely on rigid duty, but on an authentic, profound love and an unwavering loyalty to each other and to the precious child who would irrevocably unite their peoples. 9 months to the day after that fateful night, the Vance mansion echoed profoundly with the lusty cry of a newborn. Evie gave birth to a healthy, vigorous boy, blessed with Caleb's piercing dark eyes and the subtle, nascent determination she already glimpsed within herself. The small, nascent heir, named Samuel Sam Vance, was the living, breathing proof that love, even when born from the most agonizing adversity, could not only flourish, but also forge a future of resplendent brilliance. Caleb, as he cradled his infant son for the very first time, felt an overwhelming, primal emotion surge through him, a profound connection that transcended mere power and transient politics. He looked at Evie, who smiled, utterly exhausted yet radiantly luminous, and he knew, with a certainty that resonated to his very core, that his empire was forged not merely from sun-baked earth and entrenched traditions, but from a fierce, indomitable love that had defied all expectations.